Welcome to Think Like a Pancreas, the podcast. Our goal is to keep you informed, inspired, and a little entertained on all things diabetes. The information contained in the program is based on the experience and opinions of the Integrated Diabetes Services clinical team. Since this is a very individualized condition, please check with your healthcare provider before implementing any of the weird stuff we may happen to share with you today.
Welcome to Think Like a Pancreas, the podcast. I'm Jenny Smith, and I have the privilege of stepping in as your host so that Gary can sit alongside our guest, Ginger Vieira, to discuss their experiences with inhaled insulin. It's been around for a while, but we're going to really get into some good details about use and everything today. You may know Ginger from her content on social media channels, many of them, where she discusses her life with diabetes and all the ups, downs, tips, tricks, and things that she's developed along the way to make it less cumbersome and more just doable. Most notable is her newer Diabetes Nerd channel on YouTube, and she also recently released a new book, The Exercise with Type 1, on Amazon. She's got many others that are available and just wonderful resources. But you may also know her because together we wrote the book Type 1 Diabetes and Pregnancy. So thank you very much for joining us, Ginger. We're super excited.
Thanks for having me. It's always so good to see both of your faces.
Absolutely. And Gary, I'm kind of settling in. I kind of have my big old armchair here as the host a couple of times now for the Think Like a Pancreas, the podcast. So I don't know. Might need to watch out. I like this hosting thing.
Yeah, I think the two of you are ganging up on me already.
Look at his arms are already crossed. He's already mad.
So, over the past couple of weeks, our integrated diabetes team has sort of watched and heard. We sort of, chit chat back and forth. We text each other just as a clinical team and as friends with diabetes. So Gary's been trialing use of Afrezza, an inhaled insulin. And we've kind of watched your ups and downs and, kind of some of your highs or maybe sort of your lowlights on social media about using it, right? We also will have a really awesome blog that you wrote about your experience, specifically pros, cons, kind of insights into using on our integrated diabetes website. So I think I'd like to kind of get an idea of what is inhaled insulin? Tell me. Inform me like I am new to using it, please.
I mean, the exact name of the product is Technosphere. Technosphere is this dry powdered form of insulin that sits in a little cartridge. It looks a lot like, I think of the houses from Monopoly, those little green houses that you step on and they hurt like anything. That is, there we go. There's a cartridge example. That little white part of it is where the insulin is held. And the cartridge is loaded into something that looks like a whistle, and you just drop it in, close it up, and inhale the stuff. Instead of giving the insulin below the skin, the insulin absorbs through the lining of the lungs. It actually absorbs through the alveoli of the lungs directly into the pulmonary circulation. So it gets into the bloodstream really quick and starts working pretty fast. Within a few minutes, it starts working.
So it's definitely really, when we talk about rapid, so many people complain about our rapid insulin being called rapid, but not really being rapid, right? We still need that pre-bolus time, so to speak. But what it sounds like you're saying is that it really is truly rapid comparatively.
It's ultra rapid. Ultra rapid. Come on, Gary, admit it.
It's uber rapid, yeah.
Uber rapid. What did you guys find with how quickly it starts to work for you?
I mean, within 15 minutes, I see it turning my CGM around. And they say, it's active in your system within 2.5 minutes. And then you can see a noticeable change in direction of your blood sugar within 15. And I experienced that. And I have to remind myself of that sometimes, too, when I'm correcting like a frustrating high because I underdosed or, I ate Chinese food and I'm going through the roof or something and I just underdosed, and I have to remind myself, like, nope, just wait a minute. And then sure enough, it's like,
Is yours similar, Gary? I remember reading some of the things that you were texting as you were using it, but do you find similar?
Oh yeah, it's 2 to 3 times faster. It starts 2 to 3 times faster. It peaks 2 to 3 times earlier, and it clears 2 to 3 times faster.
yeah.
So yeah, it is it's uber ultra rapid, whatever you want to call it. And I mean that has clear advantages. Having the insulin work that quickly, you're not as likely to see the big spikes in the blood sugar after meals, and that plagues almost everybody with diabetes because, like you point out, the rapid acting insulins that we're used to using are not rapid at all. They're
So slow.
they're,
Yeah.
they're rapider than regular insulin that we
Right.
had decades ago, but they don't come close to matching the insulin our bodies produce, which works in seconds. So the insulin we give below the skin, in many cases, it just doesn't work quickly enough and doesn't clear quickly enough to work effectively for us.
That's
And I
actually,
explain
I
it
was,
too as like, sorry, I was just going to say, I explain it as it's in fast, but it's also out fast, which has advantages and disadvantages.
that's actually what I was going to ask is that finish, right? I've heard a couple of people that I get to work with who've commented that when they've used it, the end effect of it, it's almost like landing a plane correctly. Like it's got to finish and you know when it's done, especially if you know that your basal behind everything is the
Yeah.
right dose to begin with. You can
Yeah.
almost watch the end effect of a Frezza compared to the sort of the little drip effect that you get with rapid acting insulin, not quite seeing 100% the stop line. Is that right?
What I love about it is, once you learn how to use it, and I will say it takes a few months to really learn the basics of using it. And then from there, we'll get into this later, but lots of experimenting because I combine it with Novolog for some meals too. But it's like, let's say I took my dose at 1 o'clock and I ate at 1 o'clock, or I was correcting a high at 1 o'clock. Either way, I took that small dose at 1. If I'm 90 at 2 o'clock, I don't worry about going low because I know that smaller dose of a Frezza has already cleared my system. If anything, if I ate a meal and now that's cleared my system, that first dose, if anything, I'm thinking, all right, if I'm about to walk my dogs, I'm not going to take another dose yet, but I'm going to watch and see if I start going back up because I might need what's called a follow-up dose because the food is still digesting, but the first dose cleared my system. So the 4s, the little blue ones, last about, they say 90 minutes, but most people would say it's more like 60. And then the greens, which are 8 units, and this is not comparable to 8 units of Novolog. I'm sure Gary and I will get into that later, the dosing, but I think of them as small, medium, and large. So the 8 is like medium. That's more like I think of it as being in my system definitely for an hour and a half in terms of being aware of insulin on board. And then the 12s I hadn't even used until recently. I got some from a friend who didn't need them, and was like, "Whoa, these are awesome!" And that definitely is like 2 hours and is helpful for certain types of meals.
Did you try a couple of different doses too, Gary? I can't remember.
Yeah, I started out only using the 2.5. I shouldn't say the 4s. The 4s act like about 2.5. The 8s act like 5. The 12s act like 7.5. So you can dose in roughly 2.5 unit increments.
But I would argue with that eventually. At first, it seems like that. But for me, 2.5 units of Novolog can drop my blood sugar 150, 200 points. Like I would never, if my blood sugar was 250, for example, I would take 1 unit of Novolog. But if my blood sugar is 250 and I want to correct it with a Frezza, I can take a 4 and I don't crash.
Yeah, I had some of my most severe low blood sugars in a long time that way, taking the small cartridge.
Yeah.
And I'm the same way. 2.5 units can drop me 150 to 200 points also.
Yeah.
And I did. It wasn't as if it came down to 100 and stopped. It kept going.
Yeah.
And
So
I
one
ended
thing
up with
I've
some
heard,
nasty lows that way.
I had I had a severe low, not like losing consciousness, but I was like, oh my gosh. And when I first used it, and when you're first using it, I've heard this from a lot of people, you're really sensitive in that first month. And then definitely by the second and third month, that hypersensitivity calms down and it's much more manageable. Like I can take a 4 for what's a very low carb meal. Let's say it was some chicken and broccoli, and I might need another 4 an hour later. So it's like that hypersensitivity I experienced at first, and I learned this from somebody else in a Freza group on Facebook. I was dividing the cartridges in half to make 2s, and that was really helpful at first. And then I found I just didn't need to do that at a certain point. And then I use Novolog if I need a smidge of insulin, and yeah.
Yeah, I've talked to people who have been using Afrezza for an extended period of time, and some have reported just what you're saying, that it has sort of a forgiving effect after a while and doesn't produce the dramatic drops that that full dose normally would. But other people say that didn't happen to them ever. And
No? Okay.
personally, I don't want to go through 3 months of dealing with that in hopes that somehow the insulin is going to start thinking and adjusting on my behalf and
I don't know. It wasn't like that. I had it also, the bad low I had is I had also Novolog on board. So did you have basal insulin from your pump on board?
Yes.
That is what I think contributes to the worst lows on Afrezza, is when you have these types of insulin stacked. And it doesn't matter that your basal insulin was for background needs. It was still rapid acting insulin on top of ultra rapid acting insulin.
Yeah, but my basal insulin is titrated. It keeps me steady when I'm not eating and not bolusing.
Yeah,
So
but I
it
think there
shouldn't
is
be
something to be
contributing.
said. I think there's still something to be said for the combination of Afrezza with long acting versus the combination of Afrezza. And I know a lot of pump users who use Afrezza to correct their highs, and they love it.
Yeah, I
But
loved
it,
how fast it
yeah,
would come down, but I'd have to be up around 250 or higher before I could
to use
trust
it.
the
Right.
small cartridge.
Yep.
But
And you
I did
used it
like
how
you.
long again, Gary? Was it 2 weeks?
Yeah, I did 2 weeks of pure nothing but Afrezza for my bolus dosing, and then I've continued to use it on occasion, just in certain situations. So
Right.
Jenny, you were describing the plane landing, and I like that analogy. For a plane to land successfully, it's got to come down, at a certain pace and level off.
Right.
You don't want the runway going. You don't want it taxiing too long because it'll go off the runway,
Correct.
and you don't want it dropping out of the sky because it'll crash. It's got to be just the right length of time that it's gliding down. And I
Yeah.
found in a lot of cases the traditional rapid insulins just work far too long. With
They do.
exercise, especially, it's frustrating to
Yeah.
try to work out after meals and between meals when you've still got bolus insulin acting, and you have to just eat all this carb to try to keep yourself from dropping too low. Afrezza was great for that because it would
Yeah.
clear usually within 90 minutes. I didn't have to worry about it causing me a drop during my workouts. But
Right.
Yeah.
sometimes the other problem is that it works too fast.
Right.
That plane does fall out of the sky sometimes when you're using Afrezza, where the insulin just plops, does its thing, and it's gone.
Yeah.
The problem is that's not how most food works.
Right.
Very rarely do you find food that's finished digesting in 60 to 90 minutes. The
Right.
average food takes about 3 hours, and that's average.
Yes.
Most
Yep.
Yeah.
American diet food takes even
A
longer
longer
than that.
time.
Yeah. When
Well, and
I
I think
know
that,
that I'm sorry, Jenny, go
no, it's
ahead.
okay. I was just
I,
going to say, I think
yeah.
that's where it takes some experience, right? You
Yes.
used it for a set amount of time. I think, you've used new things and tried kind of everything. You're your own guinea pig, Gary, for as long as I've known you, right? You like to try it, figure it out, put something out there from a pro con kind of list and give it to the general population who really needs to know more. So your use was really, I want to get some information out there and to take away from it maybe some experiences that prove when and why you want to use it, even if you're not going to use it on a day-to-day basis. Where Ginger, you kind of do the same thing and you kind of try a
I
lot of
love
different
experimenting.
things
Yeah.
too.
I'm on 2 meds for type 2 diabetes that I really love.
Right.
But we won't even get into
That would
that
make a good book,
rabbit
Ginger,
hole.
about a diabetes science experiment, perhaps.
Oh,
That'd make a good
yes,
book.
yes.
I think
That
that
book
might
needs
already
to be
be.
updated. That's not even available anymore because it's so outdated. It's
It's so
20 years
old.
old. I need to rewrite it, basically.
Well,
Teresa is helping me, actually.
I was going to say, because, your experiences that have led to your decision to use and what sounds like ongoing use, you've used it for a much
Oh,
longer
I would be
time.
heartbroken if this
It's
medication was
gone.
taken from me. Heartbroken if Afrezza was taken from me. I
So,
don't
what were
want to
your
be on a
initial.
pump, right? Well,
Right.
let's start with that fact, right? Is that I do not want to be on a pump, and I will not go back on a pump until they change this whole infusion site entire thing. Just thinking about having an infusion site in my skin again makes me like I don't know what kind of how do you describe it? I
Yes,
curl
I
up in a
remember.
ball.
I
Yeah,
remember when you were, I think it was Omnipod,
yeah,
and
for 1 month.
we were chatting, we were working together, and you texted me, you're like, I'm pulling this thing off. I'm going back to injections. I cannot do this
Yes.
anymore. And I was like, that's okay. We'll just go back to MDI. That's total. I mean, everybody's
Yeah.
got their thing, but what was your grand pull to trying Afrezza finally? Because it's been out for a while.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. So Jenny's referring to, she was my pregnancy coach for my first pregnancy, and I tried Omnipod because you're supposed to want to be on a pump, right? For pregnancy, it's supposed to be easier, but I couldn't take it. So anyway, I got a little bit of Afrezza from a friend at a diabetes camp I was speaking at. I tried it. I went really low. I was like, this stuff's crazy. Ditched it. And a year later, I was writing lots of articles about inhaled insulin for a website. And the articles were sponsored by Mankind. And so I was listening to like 6 different people tell me about how much they love Afrezza. And I was like, all right, I got to try this again. And I started using it, and I approached it as an experiment. I didn't use any Novolog for a month and figured out just what can I do and not do with Afrezza. It takes a long time to really figure it out, but you have to go into it with such an open mind because it's so different than rapid acting injectable insulin. And I would challenge you, Gary. I would love to see if you lowered your basal rates a little bit and tried Afrezza again. I know you had them titrated, and I know you know what the heck you're doing, but I would love to see if maybe they need to come down when you're on Afrezza because it's just so fast that I would be curious. A friend told me that when you start Afrezza, you might need a little boost in your long acting
oh,
because you don't have all this Novolog hanging out
left
all the
around.
time, right? If you
Huh.
think about how often you take Novolog, it's like practically always present in your system. So I did increase my Lantus dose by like 10 or 20% at first, and it's since kind of settled.
Come back down.
Yeah.
Well, and I wonder the difference, Gary, you using it with a pump with rapid insulin. Even that, you're getting a little hint of drawn out effect. So I wonder if some of your experiences were also very different to Ginger's, mainly because she's using a true basal injected insulin versus a pumped drip drip of a rapid insulin to mimic basal, right?
I tried it both ways.
Oh,
The
you
first,
did.
yeah, the first week I was taking Degludec, which is Tresiba,
Yep.
as my basal insulin, and that it was not good. I mean, I have a significant peak and valley in my basal needs, so my sugars were constantly rising or falling depending
So
on the
you
time
really
of
need the
day.
pumped adjustment that
So,
a basal
I went on the
injector.
pump with the, the auto adjustment features off, just my basal rates that I know from testing keep me steady. And the whole point is that the basal insulin should not be influencing the glucose level. It should just be holding it steady. Even if I had artificially raise or lower my basal insulin to compensate for the Afrezza being too great or not working enough at different times of day, that means that now the basal is not keeping me steady in a fasting state. So the
Yep.
basal insulin, you basically, once you have it fine tuned, you can write it off as an issue. It's no longer a factor that's affecting your glucose levels. It's just the bolus insulin that's doing that. And that's why I just could not get the correction dose to work right. I couldn't fine tune it. But Ginger, I tried also what you tried also, which was splitting the cartridge into a half dose.
Yeah.
Looked like a drug dealer doing that.
Yeah, it does. It
We
feels
took
so shady.
a picture of that and put it in the blog post that's going to be on our website. But yeah, you got to literally, it's like you're tapping it out, you're taking a credit card, splitting it into different
Yeah.
set
A little
doses.
scoop.
I
Yeah.
did use my HSA card, so I feel like it was at least healthcare related to do that. And then, scraped it back, half the dose back in, and yeah, it worked like half. I don't know how sanitary that really is or anything, but
Yeah, yeah.
it did the
Right. And it's
job.
tedious. It was tedious. I did
Yeah.
that for a few months and then I just stopped and started
Yeah.
using
Someone
Novolog
I
when I
know
knew
who's
kind of
been on a
dose.
Frezza a while, they'll take like an hour and just take a whole bunch of their small
Yes.
cartridges and make up a whole bunch of
Yeah.
half dose cartridges, which are like a 1 1/4 unit instead of
Yeah.
2 1/2 of actual insulin.
I know a guy who eats only meat. He's a intense carnivore, and he uses a Frezza, and he spends a lot of time, making his micro
Making his
doses. Yeah,
doses.
Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
asked the CEO why they don't make a smaller one for type ones, and he said that it doesn't seem like enough people would need it, which I would argue with. And then he said that also it just costs so much money to demonstrate to the FDA why they need yet another dose.
Yeah, the
Right.
manufacturing process is expensive.
Yeah,
It's a lot of
yeah,
equipment, and yeah, they would really add to the cost of the product. And
yeah.
Well, and since you guys both seem to have found some experiences where they're beneficial. I mean, Ginger, you said even that you're using it in combination with Novolog as a rapid insulin. And Gary, you've found some circumstances that really are a definite pro to using it compared to pumping the insulin. So, what are some of those circumstances that you're using just the Afrezza or the combination, or what meals?
Sure. So to give you a little example, so I right now I take 10 units of long-acting Lantus. I love Lantus. I've tried the newer ones. I just hate them. I'm so old school. I am like 90 years old at heart. Jenny knows
Okay.
this. Yeah, I'm okay with it. I don't
What
watch
works for you
Matlock,
is what
but
works for
yeah,
you, right?
yeah.
So,
So
Murder,
I
She Wrote, you watch that.
I did watch it a lot back in the day, yes. So, in my youth, when I was a teenager, I was only about 50 years old at heart. So, anyway, um, so I need a teeny smidge of Novolog around 8 o'clock in the morning because I don't eat breakfast. I practice intermittent fasting. And so my liver is like, here's some sugar, right? I used to need more insulin, a little bolus for Dom phenomenon, but I take metformin now before bed, and that has totally calmed down my glucose production in the morning, which has been so helpful. So that's the first dose of insulin I take most days is that little, I use a syringe. I hijack. I don't know if we can share this, but whatever. I have a YouTube video on this actually. I hijack my pen and I'm not even taking a half unit. I'm taking like sometimes like an amount I can barely see because it sometimes overlaps with when I'm about to go for a
you're
jog.
sort of assuming it's like a quarter unit ish,
Yeah, and I can
maybe.
like
Yeah.
barely see it. So I'm sticking the syringe into my pen like it's a vial of insulin. And I was doing that in front of a type 1 the other day at dinner, and she was just like, I
See, it's
cannot
like
get
cutting the
over
Afrezza,
this.
right? You
Yeah,
got to
yeah,
hijack what
yeah.
you do to get what you need.
Yeah, so Afrezza cannot do that for me, right? And that's to prevent the high. If I missed that dose and I did already go up to 200, then I could use a 4, but not if I'm about to go run 3 miles. So it depends on some other variables. So the first meal I usually eat every day, I use a combo of Novolog and Afrezza. I eat a giant Honeycrisp apple with freshly ground peanut butter. I'm kind of addicted to it. I can't wait to eat it today. It's going to be so good. And I like to take 1 unit of Novolog with it, and then I'll take a 12. Now that I have the 12s, I used to need 2/8 of Afrezza. And what I like about adding the Novolog is that when the 2/8 or the 12 runs out, my blood sugar is going to rise really quickly. And that's the hardest thing about Afrezza is that when it clears your system and the food's still digesting, it shoots up. And if you don't have a CGM to say like, oh, hey, you just crossed your threshold, then you're not going to know. And
Right.
so but it is so fast that you also don't have to freak out. Like I have another friend who uses a Freza, and she's like, I don't even worry about highs anymore because the Freza turns around so fast. I'm like, all right, I'd still prefer to prevent the highs, right? But
Right.
but she's right. Like you can fix that high so quickly. On a graph, it looks like, and if it was Novolog, it'd be like gradually coming down. It's so slow.
So you're kind of hitting almost your peanut butter effect with the Novolog on the back end,
Yeah.
where it would be creating the creep. And I think, Gary, that was a kind of a con to you, right? You saw the quick impact of the Afrezza, but without taking, as you were cutting your doses, right, to take just a little bit of a smidge more. This is where, discussion is really beneficial because you found a system, Ginger, with Novolog that kind of hits the creep later by dosing it in a timely manner where you've tested and done some experimentation.
Yeah.
And, you found the rise that you were annoyed with, Gary. I know.
Yeah. Well, I learned something just listening to you, Ginger, about combining traditional insulin with a Afrezza at a meal. Because one thing I really didn't like was having to think more about covering my meals and having
Right.
to dose at the meal and then to see what's going on an hour or two later and dose again. I just didn't want to have to be thinking about it between meals. I
Yeah.
want to be living my life.
Yeah.
But the idea of doing a little bit of bolus insulin, I think using a pump for the basal and using a pump to give a little bit of bolus is easy enough to do,
Yeah.
and then hit the Afrezza.
Yeah.
The situations that I still find useful and I still use Afrezza for, one, like you said, is when you have a really high blood sugar, and short of doing the rage bolus thing, you can use a Afrezza to bring it down really
Yeah.
fast. Usually within 90 minutes, the glucose will be leveling off and back close to where you want it.
Yeah.
So that's one. Another is before a workout. If you're having a meal and then you're going to go exercise soon afterwards, and you don't want all that insulin in your system during the workout,
Yeah.
you use the Afrezza. It's going to clear quickly, so you won't have all the insulin overlapping then and making you drop. And that did work nicely. And then
Yeah.
the third is certain breakfasts. I find in the morning my food digests really fast, and I often eat cereal in the morning. It depends what kind of cereal. If I have Cheerios, it's not too bad. I don't spike that high, but almost any other cereal, and I spike super high. So doing the Afrezza with those kind of breakfasts, it
Yeah.
keeps things relatively flat. You might
A
get a slight
Freza,
rise.
a Freza would be it is like finally the way a type 1 could manage cereal. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah,
like, because
any
it's just
super
so,
high
yeah.
glycemic index food,
Yeah.
it's really well built for. I
Yeah.
don't think it's well built for slower digesting foods, though. I think
On its
very,
own, it's exhausting to use just a Freza because even an apple and peanut butter, which is not like, it's not like eating pizza, right? Yes, the peanut butter is pure fat, but it's not like eating pizza where it's digesting for 8 hours. So
Right.
even those basic meals, even a salad with a lot of protein and fat, I might, if I know I'm not about to go for a dog walk or exercise in the next 2 hours, I might take a unit of Novolog if it seems a little easier based on how much, if
Right.
it's a rich restaurant salad, for example. Or I might do a combo. Even the salmon Caesar salad is a common thing I would order in a restaurant, and I might take a 4 and 1 unit of Novolog so that I just don't have to worry about that big
Later.
spike. Yeah. Or
I
like
can,
really indulgent foods like
yeah.
cupcakes, pizza. I want a good amount of Novolog on board so that I'm not relying as much on Afrezza. And I use the Afrezza to keep pounding it down and keep it down, but I don't have to take as much.
do you
I
remember
can
when
see.
the Medtronic 670 launched? That was the first real sort of hybrid closed loop system. It did what it said, it did keep people's blood sugars in range more often. But why did that system sort of flop? What about it that turned people off?
For me, it just was an insulin pump.
I
You
mean,
remember.
Yeah, I mean, overall, the 670 for me specifically was the sensor that was never accurate. And so that created a problem with what it was doing as an algorithmic system in terms of turning basal off and adjusting, and it didn't work fast enough.
Yeah.
It never worked fast enough.
So the sensor wasn't trustworthy. People had to be more, at least as many finger sticks as they used to do,
Mm-hmm.
right? There were alarms and alerts going off constantly. It
Yep.
would drop out of automated mode all the time. It was disturbing people's lives. It was getting in the way of their daily quality of life just to be able to use this system. So yeah, you can get better control, but if it's detracting from your quality of life, it may not be worth it. So I think this is something that, we
Oh
teach
no,
our
are you
patients
comparing
here.
that to a Freza, Gary? That it's
Well,
taking
I'm
away from
just
your
saying that
quality
there's
of
some
life?
things about it that it makes diabetes management more complicated.
I would
Have,
argue I think you could tackle that from both sides. If you're used to the pump doing all this stuff for you, right? And that's amazing. If I could tolerate a pump, I get it why
Mm-hmm.
people love it so much. I just I hate them with a passion, and I hate the split second of it not doing its thing and ending up in ketosis land. DKA is what normal people call it, but but the for me once you get a hang of this, it's such a to me it feels like such a low commitment because it's out of my system so quickly that it's like, all right, I'm going to take a 4 and see if that's enough. And like, oh, no, it wasn't quite enough. I'm getting up towards my little threshold there. I'm going to take a little more. And it's like, take it, on you go. When you take a dose of Novolog, it's like, oh, you better really meant that. Like, you better be committed to that dose because now for the next 4 hours, that's in your system and you can't undo it. It's like a hammer versus this feels like a little blanket. Like,
I
I'm
think
going
I
to put
can
another
see a
blanket.
marriage here, honestly, of the two things that you guys are, kind of debating, so to speak, right? Because on MDI, as you're doing, right, with Afrezza, Ginger, you've also long term been in the mindset of micromanagement. And I
Yes.
say that as a positive, right? That's not a con. It is the way that you've chosen to manage. I remember pregnancy. I mean, some of those days in third trimester, it was 16 little micro injections a day to get your blood sugar where you wanted it to go, right?
Yeah.
So you've got this willingness piece.
Right.
And but to your, point, Gary, you want almost like a set it and forget it to a degree. You're willing to work, but you also want what you're using to work with you so you have less that you have to truly consciously think of. And so what I can kind of see is maybe extended use of using it would be, because I know you're using an automated system, Gary, you could potentially navigate with the kind of system you use by adjusting targets, navigating when you enter your food. So you could get the benefit of the automation to back up what the initial amount of Afrezza isn't providing long term for you. You could use temporary overrides. You could tell your system to do something for you into the future ahead so that you get that oomph that you want, and it's set it and done now so you don't have to think about it.
with
Whereas,
most meals, I can just bolus with my system the way I normally do, and it works fine. It's,
right,
breakfast where it's a challenge, so I find the
yeah,
Afrezza more effective than, I think it's about striking a balance.
it
Yeah.
is.
It's a
Mhm.
balance between the amount of work you're willing to put in and how intensely you want to manage your diabetes.
Well, and
Right.
what stresses you out? Like, you're managing your diabetes intensely. It's not like but I think it's personalities and what is more stressful to you. Having an insulin pump attached to my body is so much more stressful to me than being like, oh, I need another follow up dose,
Right.
right? And also, I would have guessed that Gary is OCD and micromanager, but maybe not. Maybe he's really relaxed. And so I'm definitely more type A personality where I was like, oh man, I am not going to let that machine make these decisions for me. And I'm not convinced that AID is the end all be all, because I know too many people who are frustrated with their systems all the time. So they're not perfect either, right? We can
They're not.
we gloss it over, but they're amazing, but they're not perfect. You still
No.
have to intervene and deal with annoying stuff all the
I always say
time.
that the AID systems, honestly, it's when you enter into using, if that's your choice, it is like a marriage. You expect you expect a give and take. You expect to
Yes, yeah.
understand and learn what are your system's abilities and what will it not do if you don't work with it and give it the right information,
Yeah.
right? You can't expect any of the AID systems, whether you're doing an FDA approved one or one of the do it yourself systems, it will not 100% do for you unless you've got something fancier.
Yeah, and things go wrong. I was just
They
supporting a
can.
family the other day. They were up in the middle of the night, and they weren't coming to me for help, but I work with them on social media diabetes content, and we posted about it. They were up in the middle of the night because her AID system was not communicating good data, and her blood sugar, it said it was 500 and 200, and it was like
Oh,
it was just a mess, right? So none of it is perfect, and I
no.
think it always comes down to like choosing which battles feel less obnoxious to you.
Right. Which
They,
also
I
comes
find
down,
a lot of doctors who make the decision for their patients.
Yeah, yeah,
Instead of teaching them about the pros and cons and letting the patient make the decision,
yeah.
they're
Oh, I
making the
hear this
decision
all the
for them.
time.
yep.
Yes. So many people have come to me and said, I wanted to try it. And my doctor said, no, it's not for type 1. And so I have a YouTube video that's all about getting inhaled insulin, because if you don't follow the steps right in the process of how the prescription is written and then the appeal, it will get rejected. I switched insurance companies, and I got rejected automatically because my doctor did the thing wrong. They didn't care that he tried to fix it. They said it was, too late. The appeal was done, and he just didn't understand what he was doing. But I figured out the name of the CEO at my insurance company. I live in Vermont, it's a small place. I found his name, his address. I contacted him
I will
directly.
come and find you.
I figured out the email system. I guessed his email address, and I contacted him. I wrote him a letter and said, I have taken, 52,000 injections. Imagine if there was something that could reduce this for the next 25 years of my life with type 1. And oh, wait, there is, but your company rejected it because of a paperwork mistake.
Well,
Please.
to me,
Yeah.
that's one of the drawbacks is almost
Yeah.
Yeah.
everyone has to get pre-authorization for
It's so
this.
tedious. Yeah.
And I listed, in the blog post, and this is on our Thinking Like a Pancreas blog. You go to integrateddiabetes.com, it's on our website. Uh, but I listed what I felt were the strengths, the benefits, and then some of the challenges associated with using this, so that anybody who wants to can learn about it and then decide, is it worth my trying, and is it worth using on a full-time basis, not at all, or something in between. Maybe I want to use it in conjunction with MDI or with a pump or with an AID system. And if it's going to be used with an AID system, you got to get some expert training so that the AID system doesn't foul
Yeah.
things up while
Yeah.
you're using it.
Be
That's
careful.
important to
Yeah.
understand.
Yeah.
That's what I was actually going to ask is if there's, if you guys had advice to give prospective users, people who have heard of it, are maybe considering it, or have a friend who's got it and is like, hey, you want to take a puff?
Yeah.
You got
I
some
mean,
ginger, right?
right.
Just one
Yeah.
puff.
I mean,
Just
what would
one
be,
puff.
if you had, an idea of what advice you'd give to somebody,
I
what
mean, I give advice to people on this all the
I know
time.
we all
Yeah.
do here. Yes,
Yeah.
Gary does,
Right.
you
Of
do. But
course.
if you just for the people maybe listening to this, what would
Yeah.
your like in a nutshell, what would be your advice to people who
I
are
would say
considering?
go into it with a very open mind, and also only use a Freza for meals and corrections for, at least 2 weeks, just so that you're not creating a dangerous mess of overlapping it with meal boluses from Novolog. And then if you're on a pump, that's, as Gary already said, definitely talk to your healthcare team, because you don't want that AID system correcting when you're also trying to correct and etc. I know people who do it well. John Solojon, so I don't know how to say his last name. He created one of the smart pens, Insulin. He
Insulin.
uses it, and he's a big fan of it. That would be my 2 cents: is go into it like an experiment for the first month. It's gonna take time.
Yeah, I'd recommend dipping your toe in the water before diving in completely. I think it's worth trying, but do it on a very limited basis. Like maybe just use it to fix your highs, or just use it for breakfast, or pick a meal or a snack, and master it in that situation, and then spread it out and use it in other situations. But I think it's also important to work with a healthcare team that understands it, that has used it, has experience with it, so they don't just say, "Nah, it's
That's
not for
hard. That's hard to
you."
find. Yeah. I mean, I had no healthcare team supporting me. I had a few people that I'd interviewed. Um,
Yeah.
but I think it does
We
make a
can do
difference
it.
if you're on a pump and you have other, if you're on a long acting insulin, I think it's a much simpler experiment than if you're adding it to a pump.
We're
And then,
available through Zoom, phone, email, anywhere in the world, so
Yes.
people can reach
Call
out to us if
Gary.
they need help.
Yeah.
right. I know most of us on our integrated team have definitely given a try to Afrezza and/or have it in our back pocket, so to speak, for use in those circumstances. You know, as you defined, you're not using it every single time or every meal, Gary, but you found your circumstances. In my kind of 2 cents in that would really be start with your known meals. You know, Ginger, your apple and peanut butter has I don't know how long been in your intake. You have
Right.
eaten
I've been eating that
apple
since high school. Yeah.
you have been eating that a very, very long time. And so you had it figured out with your rapid insulin. And so it was kind of a little easier for you to roll into using the
Well,
Afrezza
I have
because,
to say,
okay,
I had to do experimenting
yeah.
because I also changed what kind of apples I eat. The apples, I keep
Oh,
choosing bigger ones that are even sweeter. So
yeah.
I've gone from, like a basic normal sized apple now
To
to
the
like
gigantic
the
Honeycrisp.
highly genetically modified honey crisp that are half the size of my head. So
Yeah.
I did have to do some learning.
But at
But
least
yeah.
it was a known meal, and that is kind of my point is choose your known meals, kind of
Yeah.
along the same lines as you said, Gary. You know, don't go out for the meal that's the craziest something you've never eaten and I'm gonna throw a
Right.
Frezza in here. That's
Yeah.
not the greatest time to start it. It would be
Yeah.
do it with your typical lunch meal, see how it goes, and then do some experimentation around that. And, as always, if you need some help with it, obviously the integrated diabetes team is certainly here to help. Ginger has some wonderful online resources as well, and information and blogging and not so much blogging anymore. I think mostly just
I've got a couple
posting.
articles and some YouTube videos. I'll send them.
Right.
We'll put them in the show
Fantastic.
notes. Yeah.
Well, it's been really I think, a great conversation about Afrezza because it's brought a lot of perspective from two people who have different use to begin with,
Yeah.
to kind of bring some ideas around how to make your best use of it. So, thank you guys for joining.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
Thanks, Jenny.
absolutely. Absolutely. So, Think Like a Pancreas, the podcast. Thanks, Ginger, again for joining us. Gary, thanks for handing over hosting to me.
I like that. I'll let you be host as much as you like. It's
You
nice
look so
being.
relaxed.
It's
Yeah.
yeah. I can just
Jen-
chill. This is good.
Jenny's the natural host.
Well, you guys are awesome, and thanks again for being here. If you need anything, obviously, just find us at integrateddiabetes.com. Have a great day.